I'm Solomon Ayele Dersso. I'm a member of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights. I chair the working group on extractive industries, environment and human rights violations in Africa in the Commission. This is one of the mechanisms of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, which is tasked with the responsibility of monitoring the human rights situation and environmental issues that arise in the extractive industries sector. As you all know, the extractive industry sectors historically, but also broadly speaking in Africa, has very substantial consequences on the lives, livelihoods, land, territories, as well as the environment of the African continent. While the extractive industry sector has enormous potential for contribution to the socioeconomic development and thereby the improvement of the living standard of people of the continent, more often than not, this potential of the extractive industry sector has not been felt in the lived experiences of most people on the continent. Contrary to this, the natural resources of the continent and the operation of the extractive industries has brought a great deal of suffering, a great deal of human rights violations, and also environmental degradations on many parts of the continent. In the context of the current rush for critical minerals and also what are called transition minerals, in the context of the green energy transition, there is another scramble for these rare minerals on the African continent. And in this context, our working group asked the question whether once again, as in the past, the continent is going to face the resource curse arising from this rush for critical minerals. So our work as the working group is to promote the respect for and observance of the human rights standards of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, particularly as they relate to the exploitation and extraction of natural resources that the continent is enormously endowed with. Under Article 21 of the African Charter, specific obligations have been laid out. Actually, so much so that this is one of, if not the longest provisions of the Charter, highlighting the importance that is attached to and the historical significance of the natural resource exploitation of the African continent for the exclusive benefit of the people of the continent. With respect to the state of human rights on the African continent and broadly what we can do and should do, I think it's important to note that in terms of normative development, having the right norms relating to human rights, in terms of institution building, having the various institutions for the monitoring and implementation of human rights standards, a lot of progress have been made, both through the normative development contribution of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights and broadly by the African Union. Yet the gap between the promise of these various and progressive human rights norms and the lived realities of our people is ever increasingly expanding. We have to feel the urgency and we have to feel the gravity of what the vast majority of people on our continent is feeling. The higher the gulf between the promise of human rights and the lived realities of our people, the higher the challenge for appreciating the relevance of our work and the role of the Commission. We therefore need to work hard in order to harness the role and contribution of all sectors of society in order to narrow down this enormous gulf between the promise of our norms and the lived realities of the people on the continent. That is why it's extremely important for the Commission to work with other sectors of society beyond and above human rights institutions, human rights NGOs and civil society organizations. The role of The media needs to be harnessed, and to be harnessed enormously. The role of policymakers, particularly in the economic sphere, needs to be harnessed. The role of policymakers in other areas, the digital space, also needs to be appreciated and harnessed and taken advantage of. We have to use civil society organizations, use women, and the enormous potentials and entrepreneurial skills of our people. I thank you very much.